right, let's switch over to the gridiron now and bring in our NFL Eagles insider, Johnny Mac. John McMullen joins us every night at 7:30 right here on The Fix. Follow John at JF McMullen, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com, host of Extending the Play, 10 a.m. on Saturday right here on 1490 and Birds 365 starting this Monday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., Monday to Friday with John and Jody Mack, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. John, how you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you, Ryan?
Doing well. Did you catch any of the Phillies' walk-off win this afternoon?
I did not, but was that second base rule in effect? Boy, I can't get used to that. I cannot get used to that.
It's, it's a mess right now in baseball. But, hey, April 1st, good win, right? We just have 8 more months to go.
That's true.
Yeah.
April Fool's Day. Guys on second. I was following, I don't think it was a Phillies game. I think it was the Yankees game, and, they had a runner on second base. I'm like, oh, somebody must have let off with the double. No, it's extra innings. They put somebody in second base. I think that's hilarious. I think it's just such a horrible rule, but I don't know what baseball is trying to do. I really don't.
Yeah, and from all the things that they could implement or change, that's what they're doing.
Well, and you know why? That's just nobody can manufacture a run. It's home run or nothing.
Right.
And it's pretty easy to manufacture a run. You shorten up the swing, you sacrifice, you play hit and run, you steal bases, but all that has been banned from baseball. So, just you got to have that proper launch angle.
Yep.
I'm going off on the tangent. I'm off the rails early.
It's okay. It's all right. It's opening day. We can go off the rails for a minute about baseball, but we'll get it back to the Eagles, and plenty to get to regarding the team as always. But you wrote about some potential rule changes that are on the docket. It's NFL draft month, but what are some of these potential rule changes and how they could impact the Eagles and every other team in the NFL?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a lot major this year. But the competition committee basically recommended for just 2 sort of tweaks to other rules. And I think the most significant will be they're not going to have a sky judge. They're not going to have an 8th official, but I think they're going to pass more communication between the off-field official and replay and the on-field official. So instead of going to replay, in theory, you're going to have communications, and somebody could say, oh, you guys blew that, just overturn it on the field. They can huddle up and do it that way. So I think it'll be better. I think it'll make for a crisper and cleaner product. But, the one negative thing is there's certainly no transparency. One thing I loved about the XFL is they had the sky judge, and they had the camera on him when he was doing his job. So everything was plainly transparent. You knew what he was thinking. You knew what he was communicating. And that, to me, was kind of brilliant, and the NFL wants no part of that. And I think that speaks volumes. I don't understand why transparency should be a negative thing when it comes to officiating, because the less transparent you are, the more conspiracy theories you have, and you know how fans get upset and think officials are against their team. They're not, but this doesn't help when you keep things behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, why are they so quick to shut it down? They just want to keep things behind the curtain? It's that simple? I mean, do they understand the perception? I mean, not that this is even going to be a huge story, and maybe that's why they don't even care.
Well, I don't think it's yeah, I mean, I think from the league standpoint, they see there's no downtick in popularity, so they don't care, and they don't want to invite people behind the curtain, so to speak, to see how the sausage is made. And so as a whole, it's not any big story or anything being driven, but it'll be a big story individually when there's a bad call in week 3 and in Dallas or week 6 in Los Angeles or week 8 in Las Vegas, wherever. Then it becomes a big deal, but they don't seem to be able to put 2 and 2 together. So they've always been really bad with unintended consequences. I think, I remember asking Dave Phipp, the former now Eagles special teams coordinator, about the XFL's kickoff rules. It's a lot more exciting than the NFL's kickoff. And they just want no part of it. Like if somebody else comes up with something that's good, whether it's college, the old AAF now, the XFL, they don't want to steal anything, so to speak, because they want to believe that they're the front runners and all that kind of thing. Whereas if you see a good idea, just use it. So what if somebody else came up with it? But that's not how this league works.
No, it's not. And I remember asking you, I think it was on last night's show, if not the show prior, about the virtual off season and what's going to change this season. And you wrote about this on SI.com. The NFLPA is trying to say to the league, whoa, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Yeah. So fill us in.
Just such, both sides are so disingenuous. It's so frustrating because, the union, the Players Association, they've been fighting for this for years. Obviously, they want less time at the facilities, especially for veteran players, more so than younger players who don't, and I've talked about this a lot with you over the years, they don't. I'm going to be honest. Guys who are entrenched don't get a lot from off-season work. There's no pads. They understand, especially when they're, you could argue a free agent, for example, a veteran free agent like Anthony Harris. Well, maybe he needs some off-season work because he's coming into a new building with a new team and a new defense, and even though he has a history with Jonathan Gannon, you get the point. You might need some work. But for guys like Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox who've been here, even with the new coaching staff, they don't need a lot of work. But again, we go back to unintended consequences. The young players need a ton of work, and if you shut down everything for everybody, they're not getting that work. And we talked about the game and the product and how it's getting worse because practices keep getting scaled back, at least the aesthetic part of it. And again, I don't think the league cares all that much because the popularity never declines. It seems to only go up. So they don't see it as a problem. And then you have this wrangling back and forth, and both sides use it as a negotiating tactic to get something else. But J.C. Tretter's been talking about this, and that's the Players Association president. He's been talking about this for over a year. Once they got into the pandemic, which obviously wasn't planned, and they had to go virtual, and then the PA said, well, it's the same product, and they're right. Basically nothing changed. From their standpoint, the statistics are actually less injuries, although I think both sides manipulate those numbers to whatever narrative they're trying to sell. And they're even arguing that the officiating, there were less penalties, so that somehow they were fresher and didn't commit as many penalties. That's the most disingenuous part of all, because that was just a league directive. And one of the few good league directives, they said, you guys went overboard, scale it back. That had nothing to do with pandemic, no pandemic. And if the league says something else this year and says, you know what, we got to call holding more, the penalties will go up. That had nothing to do with anything, but they tried to use that. Bottom line is they want a virtual off season, and they don't want guys to have to show up at the facility. And it's quality of life. I get it. It's a tough sport. You want to be in Philadelphia if you live in Florida for nothing work or something like that from a veteran standpoint. But, if you're a first-year guy trying to make the roster, that's how you make the roster. There's, again, unintended consequences. Nobody seems to understand them.
So what will give here, if anything, and just run through again for listeners maybe who don't know how this offseason is going to play out as far as virtual versus in person, and what could change?
Well, nothing's been decided yet other than the NFL said the offseason is going to start on time. So April 19th, what that looks like, they're still negotiating, and that's the part. How much is going to be virtual? How much is going to be on field? The NFLPA wants it like it was last year, no on-field work until training camp. Now, training camp was scaled back, so that in theory wouldn't, but that means no OTAs, that means no mini camp. And coaches, obviously, in the league wants a typical pre-pandemic offseason. They want OTAs and mini camp and all that. So that's what they're going back and forth, and the Players Association is going to use COVID-19 as an excuse and say, we're not officially past it. You're jumping the gun. That's sort of their tactic, and the league is trying to pretend like everything's fine. So there's going to be some middle ground, and ultimately I think maybe they lighten up on the veterans and let the younger players, maybe rookies and first-year players, come in. But it remains to be seen. They're negotiating stuff like that.
Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider. We do this every night on The Fix at 7:30. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. All right, so we peeled the curtain back here a little bit already with your new mock draft, and everyone loves a good mock draft this time of year, John. And the number 12 pick, you went an interesting direction for anyone that missed the conversation, offensive lineman. And just to reiterate here, when you do your mock drafts, is this you predicting how the Eagles are thinking, or is this you doing what's best in your mind if you were the Eagles?
No, it's me doing what I think the Eagles are going to do. I think, all mock drafts are meaningless, but I think people who do mock drafts about what they think are even more meaningless, because at the end of the day, who cares? Right. I mean, when I get to run the Eagles, that would be relevant, but I don't. My every mock draft I do is with the assumption of what the team would do and what I think the team is going to do, and that's why I landed on Vera Tucker. But I think there's, basically about 5-6 players in the mix, and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, and the history of this team is offensive, defensive line in the top half of the draft. We know quarterback is out, so it would be those three positions: quarterback, offensive line, defensive line. And that's why I landed on who will be, I think, the best player left at number 12, even though it's not the best player amongst those positions, I should say. The curveball to me, as I also mentioned, would be cornerback, because that's a position they also value. And maybe they could find value at number 12 overall, and that's where the J.C. Horns and Patrick Surtains and Caleb Farley's might come in. But I think you can narrow it down. And as I said, I think fans are not going to like it because all they want is a playmaker. All they want is a receiver. And believe me, I got the hate now to prove it.
All right, so John McMullen's mock draft here, round 1, pick 12, Vera Tucker from USC. So let's say that's what the Eagles do. Will he potentially see the field right away, and if so, in what capacity?
I mean, he's too good a player, and there's a lot of ways you can go about it. One of the issues, and that's one of the things that people look at and say, well, they don't have a need at the offensive line, especially compared to other positions, which is true, but you also have a tremendous amount of age and a tremendous amount of injury history with certain players that are over 30. And again, remember, this is not just about 2021. You have all the evidence you need. Jeffrey Lurie's saying transition phase. The team falling back from 6 to 12 to get an extra first-round pick in 2022 when they will likely have 3 first-round picks. So this is sort of the year where you recalibrate and build up, and then you really make a move next year when you have cap space and you have all those first-round picks. And then you sort of make a run towards back towards the top of the division. In theory, that's what the Eagles are trying to do. So when you say, oh, they can't take Vera Tucker, well, where's Brandon Brooks going to be a year from now? We have no idea. Lane Johnson is going to be healthy. Jason Kelsey, is he going to be retired? The only guys are going to be here is Isaac Seumalo from a veteran standpoint. And then let's be honest. I mean, people, there was a lot of positive that came from players like Jordan Mailata and Nate Herbig and Jack Driscoll, but this guy's on a different level. This guy's on a completely different level than players like that.
So with the 37th overall pick, you are predicting here with this new mock draft that you put out, Elijah Moore from Ole Miss, wide receiver. So same question for him, John. How much hypothetically of the field would he see? I would imagine at least a good bit given the wide receiver group currently.
Yeah, I mean, if he can play at all, yeah, he'd see a ton. I mean, this team needs a receiver. By no means am I saying, when I joke about that's all fans want, for good reason. I mean, because nobody performs, and it's been astonishing. I talk about it all the time. 2 consecutive years. We've gone 2 years where a receiver has not had 600 yards or more for the Philadelphia Eagles in this era of football, where you have, some teams with 4 guys who might do that. Literally 4. I mean, it's been awful. But I also think part of it is and I always talk about player development, and it doesn't stop after you hand the card in. So at some point, the Eagles have to get Jalen Reagor back on track and back in the right direction, and even J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. And even lesser picks, whether it's Quez Watkins or John Hightower, you're putting these assets in the position. You can't just go wide receiver. You can't become the Detroit Lions. But that said, they do need somebody, and if you don't have confidence in what's on the roster, and it's pretty evident the Eagles don't, they have to go get a receiver. I'd prefer a Rashad Bateman, somebody like that, an outside receiver, but ultimately I think he might be playing, I shouldn't say playing, but limping himself into being a late first-round pick. So I think Moore's a guy who will be there as a really productive player. Undersized, so most people look at him as a slot receiver, but he can play outside as well. And, that's what the Eagles are. I think people assume that guys can't move around as well. I mean, he would come in here and move around, not play 80% of the snaps outside the numbers, but look, if he's effective, he's the type of guy who can be out there with Reagor and Fulgham. The key to me, and you hate to pick on people, but Greg Ward cannot be on the field. Can't say it any other way.
But he's going to be on the field, right?
Can't be.
Yeah.
I mean, if he is, it's a disaster for the Eagles. If he is, it's a last resort, and they failed again. Can't be out there.
I mean, who? And I agree with you, but who else is going to be in the slot?
Well, more would be that. I mean, Rager can move into the slot. If you ask me today and you had nobody, I need Fulgham to play outside. I need somebody else, whether it's Quez Watkins. To me, looked a little bit better than John Hightower. I need somebody like that to step up in play, and then I would have Jalen Rager inside. He cannot be on the field. I don't know how else to say it. It's just not good enough. It is just not good enough from an athleticism standpoint. So they have to do something, whether it comes from inside development or outside. Ultimately, I think they'll take a receiver in the first 3 rounds. And if that receiver needs to be a slot receiver, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. For some reason that's become a dirty word. That's why Justin Jefferson fell to 22. Well, guess what? He didn't play in the slot. He played outside 80% of the time, and he had one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history.
Right now, the wide receivers that are on the roster for the Eagles, who has the most potential? Because we saw that outburst from Travis Fulgham a little bit this past season. Arcega-Whiteside, we're still clinging on to some hope. Quez Watkins looked good at times. We still are completely unsure about Jalen Rager. So, yes, the wide receiving group here right now is terrible. But there's also some question marks where we really don't have the answer going into this season.
No, yeah, I mean, Rager has talent. There's no question about that. You don't get picked in the first round in this league because you're not talented. So, I mean, he's above everyone else. And then JJ's another guy. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. I do want to give one last chance with the new coaching staff, and maybe it doesn't amount to anything, but, people like to play revisionist history, and there's this goofy narrative that the Eagles reached for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. They didn't. That's where he was supposed to go. So if the Eagles didn't take him, somebody else would have taken him, whether it was 3 picks later, 4 picks later. He would have been taken in that range. So the league as a whole looked at him as a pretty good prospect. And obviously it hasn't worked out that way. And I do think part of it was getting in the doghouse of the old coaching staff. So who knows? Maybe the new coaching staff will give him a fresh slate, a new start, and maybe does something with it. Because clearly from just a trait standpoint, they are what they are. The pedigree is what it is. Rager's a first-round pick. If anything, they reached for him. He probably should have been a high second-round pick. And Arcega-Whiteside should have been where he was taken, second round, later in the second round. But those are both talented guys who haven't produced, and the Eagles got to figure out a way to get at least one of them producing.
Round 3, I'm going to throw them both out there. 70th overall, John's mock draft, you have linebacker Nick Bolton from Missouri, and then round 3, pick 84, edge rusher Patrick Jones out of Pitt. So run through quickly there those 2 picks you have in your mock, John.
Well, the Eagles need a 3-down linebacker, so they got to find one somewhere. And I look at Jonathan Gannon's history, whether it's Indianapolis, and Darius Leonard was sort of a linchpin to that defense. And then I look at Minnesota, and they have Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks. They have 2 of the better 3-down linebackers. So I do think there's a sea change with this coaching staff as far as valuing that position. They'll value it a little bit more than the previous coaching staff. And, you know, Bolton's an interesting prospect because he's all over the board. I've seen people claim he's going to be at the end of the first round all the way deep into the third round. So that's sort of a flavor guy, as I like to say it. If teams like him, you know, he might go a lot higher than expected. And if it goes a negative direction, all of a sudden he becomes a value pick. So that's more of an assessment of this team's going to take a linebacker at some points because Alex Singleton and T.J. Edwards are just not good enough, and they need improvement. And unless they can get Davion Taylor up to speed, it's going to have to come from the draft.
7 more picks here in the mock draft. We're running out of time, so I just want to ask you, John, out of the picks that we haven't discussed in your mock draft, talk about maybe the most intriguing, or out of those 7, which one of those picks could potentially be a steal?
Well, I don't know if it's a steal because I don't know if a punter could ever be a steal. But remember, the Eagles lost Cameron Johnston. Really couldn't afford him more than losing him because he was a restricted free agent. They didn't tender him. They would have liked to have had him back at a lesser price, but he got a good deal from Houston, so he's down there. And they need a punter, and they brought in a kid named Aaron Cepas as a futures contract, but he's never punted in this league. And the kid from Ohio State, Chrisman, is one of the best punters in the nation, ironically from the same school that Cam came from. And the Eagles have extra picks. So if this is the year, and I had him taking him in the 7th round, you know, you would prefer to sort of get punters and kickers in undrafted free agency if possible. But then you got to deal with everybody else and fight for them. And you have those extra picks, and it's unlikely a 7th-round positional player is going to do much. So a 7th-round punter, in a lot of ways, gives you far more value. If there's a guy who's probably going to make your team and be your punter for at least the next 4 years, I think there's significant value there.
Hey, and maybe he can catch the ball, too. You never know.
Well, more than Johnny Hecker can throw it. He'll throw a little fake punt in there.
There you go. John McMullen, follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. Check out all of his written work. A ton of new articles out on PhillyVoice.com as well as SI.com. Be on the lookout for Extending the Play every Saturday morning at 10 a.m. right here on 1490, and Birds 365 coming this Monday on PhillyVoice.com, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. John, I appreciate it. We'll do it one more time here tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, thank you. There he is, Johnny Mack. Good stuff, as always, talking mocks. It's mock season, baby.
Football in Philadelphia is a lifestyle, a passion from birth, and a personal responsibility to know the game. Boo when necessary. And think about EATLES, Eagles! Every second of every minute of every hour of every day. Birds 365 was created for you. Jody Mack, the legendary sports talker, joins forces with NFL insider John McMullen. Birds 365. Start your morning with Johnny Mack and Jody Mack across the JAKIB Media Network. Watch it live on YouTube.